To the town, they looked like proud landowners making a sacrifice to save the family farm. They wore their Sunday best, speaking of heritage and progress. But from the back of the room, I saw only the desperate greed behind their smiles. I'm Scarlett Douglas, and as my father shook hands with the man coming to poison our water, I couldn't help but remember the freezing rain on the night he cast me out for daring to speak the truth. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. This time, I didn't come back to cry. I came back to settle the score. I was sitting in a hotel room, staring at a geological survey map spread out on the bed. The room was standard. Beige walls, a stiff chair, and the smell of industrial cleaner trying to mask the scent of stale cigarettes. It was a far cry from my office in the city. On paper, I am a success story. I am the lead consultant for a firm that manages a $50 million portfolio of natural assets. I tell governments where not to build dams. I tell billionaires where not to drill wells. I have money in the bank and a reputation that commands silence when I walk into a boardroom. But sitting there in that cheap hotel chair holding a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee, I didn't feel like a high-powered consultant. I felt like a frightened little girl. I looked out the window. It was raining. Not a city drizzle, but a heavy country downpour, the kind that drums against the roof like 1,000 nervous fingers. I cracked the window open just an inch. The smell hit me instantly. Petrichor, that wet, dusty scent of rain hitting dry earth and pine needles. It was the smell of home, and it was the smell of the worst night of my life. The memory washed over me, cold and sudden. It was 5 years ago. I was 23, fresh out of college, sitting at the kitchen table in the farmhouse I grew up in. It was raining that night, too. A cold November storm that rattled the window panes. My grandmother, Nana Rose, was sitting across from me. Her hands were shaking. She was clutching her teacup so hard her knuckles were white. My father, Robert, was pacing the linoleum floor. The heels of his boots clicked, 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 a rhythm of impatience. "It's just wood, Mother," he shouted. His voice was too loud for the small room. "It is just wood standing in the dirt doing nothing for nobody." "It's the oak grove," Nana whispered. Her voice was thin, like paper. "My grandfather planted those trees. They protect the north pasture from the wind. Trees don't pay the mortgage." Robert slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "The logging company is offering cash, fast cash. We clear-cut the back 40 acres, we pay off the truck, we pay off the credit cards, and we breathe for a minute." I looked at my mother, Linda. She was standing by the sink, looking out into the dark yard. She didn't say a word. She never did. She just let Robert's anger fill the room until there was no air left for anyone else. "You can't do it," I said. My voice surprised me. It was shaky, but it was there. "If you clear-cut that slope, the erosion will wash the topsoil right into the creek. You'll kill the land." Robert stopped pacing. He turned to me. His face was red, his eyes narrowed. He looked at me like I was a stranger. "Is that right?" he sneered. "You go to that fancy college on my dime, and now you come back here and tell me how to run my land." "It's Nana's land," I said. "It is my burden," he roared. "I am the one keeping the lights on. I am the one dealing with the collectors calling the house at dinner time." He leaned over the table, right in my face. I could smell the stale beer on his breath. "If you think you're so smart, Scarlett, you can pay the bills. Can you do that? Can you write a check right now?" I stayed silent. I didn't have a dime to my name back then. "That's what I thought," he spat. "If you don't like how we survive, there's the door. Go save the world somewhere else. but don't you dare judge me in my own kitchen." I looked at Nana. She was crying, silently tears tracking through the deep lines of her face. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw pure helplessness. She wanted me to stay, but she knew I couldn't. So I stood up. I walked past my mother, who still wouldn't look at me. I grabbed my coat, and I walked out into the rain. I didn't take a suitcase. I didn't take a picture. I just got in my rusted sedan and drove until the gas light came on. I hadn't been back since. The sound of a truck driving past the hotel snapped me back to the present. My coffee was cold. I hadn't planned on coming back. Not ever. But then the phone had rung 2 days ago. It was Nana Rose. Her voice sounded older, frail, crackling over a bad connection. She wasn't crying this time. She sounded resigned, defeated. "They're doing it. Letty," she had whispered. "They aren't cutting the trees this time. It's worse. They're selling the water rights." My blood had run cold. "Who?" I asked. "A company called Geofrac. They want to drill for gas. They want to pump chemicals into the ground right behind the barn." "Nana, listen to me," I had said, gripping the phone. "If they frack that close to the house, they will shatter the limestone shelf. They will poison the well. You won't be able to drink the water. You won't even be able to bathe in it." "I know," she said. "I told Robert. He won't listen. He sees the check, Letty. That's all he sees. There is a town hall meeting on Tuesday. They are going to vote to rezone the land." That was why I was here. That was why my $50 million portfolio was on hold. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I adjusted my blazer. I looked tired, but my eyes were sharp. I wasn't the 23-year-old girl in a thrift store coat anymore. I was a scientist. I was an expert. Robert and Linda thought they were just selling rights to some muddy groundwater. They thought they were being clever. They had no idea what was actually flowing beneath their feet. I picked up the thick binder from the table, my geological report. It was heavy. It contained the truth they were too greedy to see. I wasn't going to the town hall to scream. I wasn't going there to cry about the past or beg for their love. I was going there to speak the only language they couldn't argue with. I checked my watch. The meeting started in 20 minutes. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The rain was still falling, but I didn't mind it anymore. It was time to clean up the mess. Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand your ground to protect something you loved? Your story might inspire our future episodes. The rain was relentless. It drummed against the metal roof of the Willow Creek Community Center, a sound so loud it almost drowned out the hum of the crowd inside. I sat in my rental car for a moment, watching the wipers slash back and forth. This building used to be the high school gymnasium. I remembered the smell of it before I even opened the door. Damp wood floor wax and that peculiar dusty heat that old radiators throw off. I pulled my hood up. It was a dark, oversized raincoat, enough to hide my face and my tailored blazer. I wasn't ready to be Scarlett Douglas the daughter. Not yet. Tonight I needed to be a ghost. I stepped out of the car and into the downpour. The gravel lot was full. Pickup trucks with rusted wheel wells sat next to mud-splattered sedans. The whole town was here. Inside, the air was thick. It smelled of wet wool and cheap coffee. The lighting was harsh fluorescent tubes that buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor on everyone's skin. I slipped into the back of the room, leaning against the wall near the coat rack. I scanned the crowd. It didn't take me long to find them. My parents were in the front row. My father, Robert, was wearing his Sunday suit. It was a navy blue thing he'd bought 10 years ago. It was too tight across the shoulders, now straining at the seams. He was sweating. I could see the sheen of it on his forehead even from the back of the room. He kept running a hand through his thinning hair, a nervous tic I remembered from my childhood. Next to him sat my mother, Linda. She was trying harder. She wore a bright red dress and a necklace that caught the light with a sharp, artificial glitter. It looked like costume jewelry, the kind you buy from a catalog to look wealthy when you aren't. She sat with her back straight, but her hands were twisting a tissue into shreds in her lap. They looked desperate. To a stranger, they might have looked like proud landowners. But I knew the signs. I knew the way Robert's jaw clenched when he was cornered. I knew the way Linda's eyes darted around the room, checking to see who was watching. They were drowning. I had done my research before driving down here. Public records are a terrifying thing if you have secrets. Robert was 3 years behind on property taxes. There was a lien on the tractor, and there was a foreclosure notice from the bank filed just last month. They weren't selling the water rights to build a legacy. They were selling them to keep the wolves from the door for another 6 months. Standing next to them, shaking Robert's hand, was a man who didn't belong in Willow Creek. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my father's truck. He had the polished, predatory look of a man who eats lunch in a skyscraper. That had to be Mr. Vane, the representative from GeoFrac. I watched them. Robert was laughing too loud at something Vane said. Linda was nodding eagerly like a bobblehead doll. It was painful to watch. It was the performance of people who think they have found a savior, not realizing they have just invited a shark into the boat. Then I saw her, Nana Rose. She was sitting 2 rows behind them, alone. She was wearing her old gray cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons. She looked so small in the metal folding chair. Her cane was resting against her knee. No one was talking to her. Robert and Linda had their backs to her. The neighbors, people she had known for 50 years, were giving her a wide berth, likely because they knew she opposed the deal. In a small town, money talks and dissent makes you a leper. My chest tightened. The anger that flared up wasn't the hot, explosive kind. It was cold. It was precise. Seeing her sitting there, shunned by her own son while he shook hands with the man, coming to poison her home. That was the fuel I needed. The meeting hadn't started yet. There was a 15-minute recess while the town council members set up their microphones on the stage. This was my chance. I needed to confirm something. I needed to know exactly how much they knew about what lay beneath the farm. I pushed off the wall and made my way through the crowd. I kept my head down, letting the hood shadow my face. I moved like a local, slow, unhurried. I approached the front of the room. Mr. Vane had set up a small table with brochures. There were glossy pictures of happy families and green fields with slogans like energy independence and harnessing the future. Robert and Linda were still hovering there, guarding their prize. I walked up to the table. I didn't look at my parents. I looked at the brochures. "Excuse me," I said. I pitched my voice lower, softer. Mr. Vane looked up. He gave me a practiced smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, miss. Here to learn about the prosperity GeoFrac is bringing to the valley." "I have a few questions," I said, "about the geology." Robert snorted nearby. "It's gas, honey. It's under the rocks. That's all you need to know." I ignored him. I kept my eyes on Vane. "I'm curious about the substrate," I said, "specifically the limestone shelf at 300 feet and the alkalinity levels of the aquifer sitting on top of it." Vane blinked. For a second, his smile faltered. He looked at me, really looked at me, trying to gauge if I was trouble. But then he saw the raincoat. He saw the muddy boots. He decided I was just a local who had read a Wikipedia article. He chuckled. It was a dry, dismissive sound. Listen, Vane said, leaning forward. He smelled of expensive cologne and breath mints. You don't need to worry your pretty head about the rock. That limestone is just a barrier. We drill right through it. The prize is the shale underneath. But the water, I pressed, the aquifer. If you drill through it, won't you risk contaminating the suspension? The water. Vane laughed again. He looked at Robert. She's worried about the water. Robert shook his head, eager to join in the joke. It's just nuisance water, miss. Hard water. It ruins the pipes. We've been trying to soften that well water for 40 years. It's full of calcium. Useless for crops, barely good for washing. I felt a chill run down my spine. Useless, I repeated. Complete garbage, Robert said. He sounded authoritative, like he was imparting great wisdom. Best thing to do is get it out of the way so we can get to the money. Exactly, Vane said. It's just dirty groundwater. We treat it, pump it out, and get to the gas. Everyone wins. I stood there staring at the glossy brochure in my hand. They didn't know. They truly didn't know. My father had spent his entire life walking over that ground, complaining about the hard water that clogged his shower head, never once realizing why it was hard. He didn't know that the nuisance, calcium and magnesium, were the markers of a world-class mineral spring. He didn't know that the dirty groundwater he was so eager to drill through was a pristine, high pH alkaline reserve that had been filtering through that limestone for 1,000 years. He was about to let a stranger pump toxic sludge into a vintage champagne bottle because he wanted the 5-cent deposit on the glass. It wasn't just greed. It was ignorance. Profound, willful ignorance. I see, I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. So, the water has no value to the current owners. Not a dime, Linda chimed in. She had stepped closer, smelling the potential for an argument she needed to squash. It's our land, and we know what it's worth. And you're okay with the environmental impact report? I asked Vane. The one mandated by the state? Vane waved a hand. Standard paperwork, just a formality. We have a very generous agreement with the family to handle all restoration efforts. Translation. They paid Robert a lump sum to look the other way when the land died. Right, I said. Thank you. You've been very clear. Grab a brochure, Vane said, already looking past me to the next person. Tell your friends, Geofrac is here to stay. Oh, I will, I whispered. I turned away before they could see the look on my face. I walked back toward the seating area. The anger was gone, now replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I had them. I knew exactly what they were selling. I knew exactly what they were hiding. And most importantly, I knew that Mr. Vane was lying about the geological risk. He knew drilling would shatter the aquifer. He just didn't care because he thought the water was worthless. He was betting on the ignorance of a desperate farming family. He hadn't bet on their daughter. I found a seat in the third row, right on the aisle. I took off my wet raincoat and folded it over the empty chair next to me. Underneath, I was wearing my charcoal blazer and a silk blouse. I didn't look like a farm girl anymore. I looked like what I was, a woman who charges $500 an hour to tell people the truth. I reached into my bag and pulled out the binder. I set it on my lap. The room quieted down. The council chair, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, tapped the microphone. The feedback squealed, making everyone wince. All right, everyone, Henderson said. Let's get started. We have a motion to rezone the Douglas property for industrial extraction. Robert, Linda, the floor is yours. I watched my parents walk up the steps to the stage. They looked like they were walking toward a coronation. I opened my binder. I uncapped my pen. Let them talk, I thought. Let them dig the hole a little deeper. Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever watched someone make a terrible mistake because they were too proud to ask for advice? Your story might inspire our future episodes. The council chair. Mr. Henderson finished his introduction. He looked tired. He adjusted his glasses and gestured to the stage. "All right, Robert," he said. "The floor is yours." Robert walked up to the microphone. He stood tall, puffing out his chest. He tapped the mic twice, thump thump, sending a dull echo through the gym. Linda stood right behind him, smoothing her red dress, smiling that tight, practiced smile at the crowd. "Friends," Robert began. His voice was loud, booming with false confidence. "Neighbors, we all know farming is hard. We all know the soil isn't what it used to be." He paused for effect. "My family has worked this land for 3 generations, and I intend to keep it that way. But to save the farm, we have to embrace the future. This partnership with Geofrac isn't just about us. It's about bringing jobs to Willow Creek. It's about progress." A few people in the back clapped. Most just stared. "Now," Robert continued, "I know some folks are worried about the water. But let me tell you, as the man who drinks it every day, that water is hard as a rock. It kills the crops. It ruins the pipes. Selling the drilling rights is a mercy to the land." "It's a lie." The voice was thin but sharp. Nana Rose was standing up. Her hands shook as she gripped the back of the chair in front of her. "You're killing the land, Robert," she cried out. "You're poisoning the well." The room went silent. Linda moved fast. She stepped down from the stage and hurried to Nana Rose. She didn't look concerned. She looked annoyed. She put a hand on Nana's shoulder, heavy and firm. "Mother, sit down," Linda hissed, though the microphone on the stage still picked up the edge in her voice. "You're confused. You haven't taken your medication." "I am not confused," Nana shouted, pulling away. "You're making a scene," Linda snapped. She pushed Nana back into the chair. "Be quiet." That was it. That was the moment. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the gym floor, a harsh metallic screech that cut through the tension. Every head turned. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at the stage. "She isn't confused, Linda," I said. My voice was calm, projecting clearly to the back of the room. "But you are." Robert squinted against the stage lights. "Who is that?" I stepped into the aisle. I walked toward the front. My heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. "It's me, Dad." Robert's face went slack. The color drained out of him. "Scarlett." Linda froze. Her hand was still on Nana's shoulder. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer her. I walked past them. I walked up the stairs to the stage. Mr. Henderson looked at me confused. "Miss Douglas, I'd like to speak on the motion, Mr. Chairman," I said. I didn't ask. I took the microphone from the stand. I turned to face the room. I saw Mr. Vane standing by the side wall. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was checking his watch. "My name is Dr. Scarlett Douglas," I said. "I hold a PhD in hydrology from Stanford University. I specialize in groundwater management and aquifer preservation." A murmur went through the crowd. They remembered me as the girl who ran away. They didn't know who I had become. "My father just told you that the water beneath our land is useless," I said. "He told you it's hard calcified and a burden." I looked at Robert. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me with his mouth open. "He's right about one thing," I said. "It is hard. But he's wrong about why." I opened my binder. I pulled out a large laminated chart and held it up. This is a chemical analysis of the aquifer beneath the Douglas farm, I said. I took these samples myself over the last 48 hours. I pointed to the red line, spiking at the top of the graph. This isn't just groundwater. This is a high alkaline mineral spring. The pH level is 8.5. It is naturally filtered through a rare limestone deposit that strips out impurities and infuses the water with electrolytes. I let that sink in. Mr. Vane, I said, turning to him, you know this, don't you? Vane stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. We're here for natural gas. No, I said sharply. You're here because you know that if you drill for gas, you destroy the aquifer. But if you own the land rights, you control the water too. You aren't just drilling for methane. You're trying to steal a liquid asset. This is ridiculous, Robert shouted. He scrambled up the stairs trying to grab the mic. She's lying. She just wants to ruin the deal. I pulled the mic away. The deal? I asked. Let's talk about the deal. Dad, how much is Geofrac paying you? $200,000. It's a lot of money, Robert yelled. It saves the farm. It's pennies, I shouted back. The force of my voice made him flinch. I turned back to the crowd. I ran the valuation this morning, I said. Based on the flow rate and the mineral composition, the water in that spring, if bottled and sold sustainably, is worth $1.2 million a year. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath. That's right, I said. Over a 10-year lease, that water is worth $12 million. Robert stopped. He looked at me. Then he looked at Vane. 12 million, he whispered. And you were about to sell it for 200 grand, I said. And in the process, Mr. Vane was going to pump fracking fluid into the ground, shattering the limestone shelf and mixing methane into the spring. He was going to turn a $12 million asset into a toxic waste pit. I looked at Vane. He was already packing up his briefcase. He knew the game was over. You were sitting on a gold mine, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught perfectly. And you treated it like dirt because you were too proud to see what was right under your feet. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the rain hitting the roof. Then Mr. Henderson stood up. He looked furious. He glared at Vane. Is this true? Henderson demanded. Did you know about the water quality? Vane didn't answer. He just buttoned his coat and walked toward the exit. Motion denied. Henderson slammed his gavel down. Motion denied with prejudice. Get out of here, Vane. The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing at Vane, cheering for the decision. Robert stood on the stage alone. He looked small. He looked at his hands, then at me. Scarlett, he stammered. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. I closed my binder. That's the problem. I walked down the stairs. I went straight to Nana Rose. She was crying, but this time she was smiling. You came back, she whispered. I came back, I said. I took her hand. Let's go home, Nana. We walked out together, leaving Robert and Linda standing in the wreckage of their own greed. Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen someone throw away something precious because they didn't understand its value? Your story might inspire our future episodes. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind that heavy mist-soaked silence you only get in the country. We stood in the parking lot of the community center. The gravel was shiny and black under the streetlights. Nana Rose was sitting in my rental car watching us through the passenger window. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright. She was safe. But I wasn't finished. Robert and Linda were blocking my path to the driver's side door. The bluster was gone from my father's face. The arrogance had melted away, leaving him looking deflated and strangely small in his ill-fitting suit. 12 million, Robert murmured, shaking his head. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me at some imaginary pile of money floating in the air. We almost gave away $12 million. Linda was sharper. She recovered faster. She reached out, trying to touch my arm. I took a step back. "Scarlett, honey," she said. Her voice was syrupy, a tone I hadn't heard since I was 10 years old. We didn't know. You have to understand. We were just trying to do what was best for the family." "Best for the family?" I asked. My voice was quiet. "You were going to poison Nana's well to pay off your credit cards." "We were desperate," Robert snapped, then caught himself. He softened his tone, forcing a smile that looked painful. "But that's all over now. We know the truth, and thank God you were here to catch it. You saved us, Scarlett. You really did." He took a step closer, rubbing his hands together. "Now we need to move fast," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to get a lawyer. We need to set up a corporation. You're the expert, so you can handle the science and I'll handle the business side. We'll be partners, 50-50. It's only fair." I stared at him. It was breathtaking, really. 5 minutes ago, he was ready to let a corporation destroy the land. Now he was already spending the money he hadn't earned. "There is no we, Dad," I said. He blinked. "What? There is no partnership," I said. "And there is certainly no business side for you to handle." Linda's smile faltered. "Now, Scarlett, don't be selfish. It's family land. Your father has worked those fields for 40 years. "He worked the fields," I corrected. "But the deed is in Nana Rose's name. It always has been." Robert waved a hand dismissively. Sure. But Mother is, well, she's old. She can't manage a mineral water operation. I have power of attorney." "No," I said. "You don't." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded document. I didn't hand it to him. I just held it up so he could see the notary stamp. "Nana revoked your power of attorney on Tuesday morning," I said. "She signed a new one. I am her legal proxy for all financial and medical decisions regarding the estate." Robert looked at the paper like it was a death warrant. His face turned a mottled shade of red. She can't do that," he stammered. "She's senile. She doesn't know what she's signing." "She knew exactly what she was signing," I said. "She knew her son was about to sell her home out from under her, so she called me." I lowered the paper. "You have no say in the land, Robert. You have no claim to the water, and you certainly aren't seeing a dime of that $12 million. The silence that followed was heavy. Linda let out a small, choked sob. Robert just stared at me, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He looked like he wanted to scream to hit something, but he knew he had lost. The leverage was gone. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind me. It was deep, polite, and calm. I turned around. A man was standing there holding a black umbrella. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and a tailored beige raincoat that looked impeccable despite the weather. "I apologize for interrupting," he said. He nodded to my parents, then focused on me. "Miss Douglas, my name is Arthur Sterling." He extended a hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, dry, and professional. "I was in the meeting," he said. "I heard your presentation. It was impressive, both the science and the delivery." "Thank you," I said, wary. "Are you with the press?" "No," Sterling said. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock. "I'm the Vice President of Acquisitions for Source Pure." I knew the name, everyone in my industry did. Source Pure was one of the few bottled water companies that actually gave a damn. They didn't use plastic. They didn't drain aquifers dry. They specialized in high-end glass-bottled mineral water sourced from sustainable springs. They were the gold standard. I was in town scouting a different location, Sterling explained. But frankly, the geology there was disappointing. Then I saw the flyer for the town hall meeting and decided to stop in. I'm glad I did. He looked past me at the dark outline of the hills. High alkaline water is rare, Ms. Douglas. A pH of 8.5 with that kind of electrolyte profile. That's unicorn water. Robert stepped forward, sensing an opportunity. It's the best water in the state. He blurted out. We're very interested in selling. Sterling glanced at Robert, then looked back at me. He ignored my father completely. My company operates on a partnership model, Sterling said to me. We don't buy land. We lease the rights to bottle at the source. We build the facility, we handle the distribution, and the landowner gets a royalty on every bottle sold. He paused. But we have strict standards. We need a local manager who understands the hydrology, someone who can ensure the extraction rate never exceeds the recharge rate. We don't want to drain the well. We want to curate it. He raised an eyebrow. Are you looking for a job, Dr. Douglas? My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the solution that saved the farm without destroying it. I have a job, I said, but I might be looking for a change of scenery. Good, Sterling said, because if you're the one managing the site, I'm prepared to offer a contract. A 10-year exclusive lease. We'll advance the capital to restore the access roads and build the bottling plant. He looked at the car where Nana Rose was watching. It will secure your grandmother's future, he added softly. And it will preserve the land. I looked at Robert and Linda. They were watching this exchange with hungry eyes. They saw their salvation. They saw the money coming back. But Sterling wasn't offering it to them. He was offering it to me. I'll review the contract, I said. But the terms have to go through me, and the royalties go into a trust for the estate, not to individuals. Understood, Sterling said. He handed me a folder. My card is in there. Call me in the morning. He nodded to my parents, a polite, dismissive nod, and walked away into the damp night. I turned back to them. You heard him, I said. Scarlett, Linda pleaded. We're broke. The bank is going to take the truck next week. Please. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were selfish, yes. They were foolish. But they were also pathetic. They were my parents, standing in the rain, stripped of their pride and their power. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, weary sadness. Go home, I said quietly. We'll talk in the morning. I got into the car and shut the door, sealing out the damp and the noise. I started the engine. As I drove away, I saw them in the rearview mirror standing under the yellow streetlight, looking small and lost in the vast darkness of the country night. Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who end up needing us. Your story might inspire our future episodes. 6 months. That's how long it takes for the seasons to change in the valley. It goes from the gray, weeping rain of November to the bright, startling green of May. I stood on the porch of the farmhouse holding a mug of coffee. It wasn't the cheap hotel sludge anymore. It was fresh brewed with the water from our own spring. The house looked different. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a clean, crisp white. The roof, which had leaked for a decade, was finally sealed with new slate. But the biggest change was the sound. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that used to vibrate through these walls was gone. The phone wasn't ringing with debt collectors on the other end. The silence was peaceful. Nana Rose was sitting in the rocking chair a few feet away. She had a blanket over her lap, but she wasn't hiding under it. She was watching the driveway. "Here they come," she said softly. I looked down the gravel road. A white delivery van was winding its way up the hill. On the side, painted in elegant blue letters, were the words, "Willow Creek Springs, Escher 1925. The van pulled up to the converted barn we were using as the bottling facility. It wasn't a factory. It was a small, clean operation that hummed quietly. The driver's door opened. My father, Robert, stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was wearing work boots and a uniform shirt with his name stitched over the pocket. He looked tired, physical. Tired the kind you get from lifting crates, not the soul-sucking tired of dodging lies. He walked around to the back of the van and opened the doors. He started unloading the empty glass crates, stacking them with a rhythm. Clink, slide, stack. A moment later, the side door of the barn opened. My mother, Linda, stepped out. She was wearing a hairnet and a white apron. She was holding a clipboard. She checked the inventory Robert was unloading. They exchanged a few words. No shouting, no drama, just the mundane, necessary communication of two people doing a job. I watched them for a long time. It would have been easy to kick them out. Legally, I had every right. When the deal with Sterling went through, the first check covered the immediate debts. I wrote a cashier's check for $42,000 to the county for the back taxes. I paid off the $15,000 lien on the tractor. I cleared the ledger, and when the smoke cleared, Robert and Linda had nothing left. The farm belonged to the estate. The money belonged to the trust. They were destitute. I remember the day I sat them down in the kitchen. The papers were on the table. "You have two choices," I had told them. "You can leave. I'll give you enough cash to get an apartment in the city and start over. Or you can stay." Robert had looked up, the hope flaring in his eyes. "Stay in the house." "No," I said. "Nana lives in the house. I stay in the house when I'm here managing the site. You can live in the guest cottage by the creek." "The cottage," Linda had scoffed. "It's tiny." "It's rent-free," I replied. "And if you want to eat, you work?" "Work?" Robert asked. "Mr. Sterling needs a driver for the local distribution route," I said. "And we need someone to manage the labeling line. It pays $20 an hour. It's honest work. Take it or leave it." They took it. Whatever pride they had left was swallowed by the reality of their empty bank accounts. Now, watching them from the porch, I realized it was the first time in my life I had ever seen my father actually sweat for a paycheck. He wasn't looking for a shortcut. He wasn't gambling on a scheme. He was moving boxes from point A to point B. And strangely, he looked better. The bloat was gone from his face. He walked with a purpose. Nana Rose reached out and patted my hand. "You did good, Letty," she whispered. "You didn't break them. You just reset them." "I didn't do it for them," I said. "I did it for the land. Someone has to drive the truck." Nana smiled. She knew better. It's a strange thing, realized justice. We often think it needs to look like a gavel coming down or a prison cell door slamming shut. But sometimes, justice just looks like order. It looks like putting things back where they belong. Robert and Linda weren't the lords of the manor anymore. They were part of the ecosystem, just like the trees and the soil. They were contributing. They were earning their keep. And in doing so, they had regained a sliver of the dignity they had tried so hard to sell. Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think they deserved a second chance? Or was I too soft? Your story might inspire our future episodes. I finished my coffee and walked down the steps. The sun was starting to dip below the ridge, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I walked past the barn. Robert saw me coming. He paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Afternoon, Scarlett," he said. "Afternoon, Dad," I said. "Load looks light today." "Yeah," he nodded. "Tuesday is always light, but the restaurant in town ordered 5 extra cases for the weekend." "Good," I said. "Drive safe." "Will do." He went back to work. I kept walking past the barn, past the guest cottage, all the way down to the tree line where the spring bubbled up from the earth. We had built a small stone enclosure around it to protect the source, but the water still flowed freely, spilling over the mossy rocks before disappearing into the collection pipes. I knelt down and dipped my hand into the water. It was freezing cold. It shocked my skin, waking up every nerve. I thought about Mr. Vane and his drilling rigs. I thought about the anger I had carried for 5 years, a heavy black stone in my chest. When I first drove back to Willow Creek, I thought I was coming to burn the place down. I thought I was coming to scream and shout and punish them for what they did to me, for the way they cast me out. But water doesn't burn. Water flows. It adapts. It finds the path of least resistance, but over time it cuts through the hardest rock in the world. Revenge is like that fracking drill. It's violent. It shatters everything to get what it wants. It leaves the earth broken and the water poisoned. But justice, real justice. Justice is like this spring. It's clean. It comes from a deep place filtered through layers of hard truth. It sustains life. And if you guide it correctly, if you channel it with compassion, instead of cruelty, it can even wash away the dirt from the past. I stood up and wiped my wet hand on my jeans. The sun was gone now. The fireflies were starting to blink in the tall grass. I turned back toward the house where the lights were coming on warm and yellow in the twilight. The water bubbled behind me, a steady rhythmic sound in the darkness. It would keep flowing long after we were all gone, and that was enough. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought within our own homes. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family to protect what matters most? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. We truly appreciate you being here. There are even more captivating stories waiting for you right on your screen. Please click one now so you don't miss the ending. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. This has been a story from Ashes of Revenge. We'll see you next time.